Greetings. Welcome to the Dragon Con Urban Fantasy Track author interview series. I'm joined today by James J. Butcher to talk about the first book, Dead Man's Hand, in his Unorthodox Chronicles. And I'm so pleased to have you here today, James. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'm very excited to talk about this book, which I very much enjoyed and would like to hear some of the background information on it. So thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, this is the first question I ask everyone is, did you read a lot of fantasy and science fiction as a child or young adult? You know, was it something that was always part of your life?
Oh yeah, pretty much. I was slow to pick up reading when I was young. I had to be tricked into reading. You know, my dad set me up to play EverQuest, and I had to learn to read to learn the quests and the abilities. And my mom got me Pokemon books to kind of trick me into starting to read as well. So that was when I first started. But I was slow on the uptake, and then once I picked up reading, especially through middle school and high school, that's all I would do during class and things like that. So I was always chewing through books.
That's the time you start getting in trouble for reading when you're supposed
to. Exactly.
Yeah, I think probably most of our viewers have been in that situation at some point in time. I know I was. Now, what can you give us as kind of your elevator pitch summation of what Dead Man's Hand is about?
I think the quickest way to describe it is it's Men in Black, but with magic instead of aliens. That's the approach that I took when I was kind of pitching it to myself and figuring out the world and things like that.
Ah, okay. Well, and that makes a lot of sense. That's a very good way of putting it. Now, you have some very interesting characteristics or, things that take place in the book, aspects of the story. And one of them is the Department of Unorthodox Affairs. And what can you tell us without giving things away, which I forgot to mention at the top of this, that we will not be divulging any major spoilers from the book, but we will be talking about some specific areas. In any case, so Department of Unorthodox Affairs.
Well, did you want to know what it is in the setting, how I came up with it, or?
Either one or both. Sure. Just so people can kind of get an idea of what it's about. And yes, how you came up with the idea would be wonderful.
So the Department of Unorthodox Affairs is the government organization that is built around basically managing magic and the supernatural, which is referred to as the Unorthodox in this setting. And so the Department of Unorthodox Affairs, they're the ones that deal with policing magic. They're the ones that deal with enforcing policy that's passed around magic. They're the ones that deal with magic and its interaction with more mundane aspects of society and life. And it's a deceptively large part of the government because magic is such a large part of this setting. But in one of the premises that I took when I was working on this story was I didn't want magic to be secret. There's a lot of urban fantasy where magic's kind of a big secret. And it seems to me that in many of those cases, magic is so huge that there needs to be a good reason why it was secret. I couldn't come up with one, so I just decided to make it not secret anymore. And so it ended up being just something that is not involved in everyone's daily life necessarily, but something that they're aware of and don't want to think about. And so that's what the Department of Unorthodox Affairs, that's where they come in, is they're the ones that keep it not secret, but they keep it subtle enough that you can ignore it if you're just a regular person. And that's more or less their function in society.
Okay. Well, and that makes a lot of sense. What you said, I mean, if you can't figure out a good reason to keep it secret.
I mean, all the good ones were taken, all the good reasons were taken. So I just decided to go a different direction with it.
Oh, well, there you go. And there is one line in there about where Grimsby's thought, where he says, if you have a regular problem with regular humans, I'm paraphrasing, then you call the police. But if it involves somebody who's part of the unorthodox, that's when you call these people. So
That's right.
yeah. And the concept of the elsewhere, can you kind of describe that for us a little bit?
Sure. It's super common in both in like fantasy and science fiction and folklore, going back for forever, to have other worlds that exist either parallel to our own or overlapped with our own or separate from our own. And so the elsewhere is just my story's version of that, where it is a essentially, the reason I came up with it actually was because I really liked writing very descriptive and probably overly descriptive aspects of the story, and like describing architecture and things like that that really weren't particularly relevant for plot and moving the story forward.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to keep doing that, but I needed to condense it into a realistic space within the book so I wouldn't just bore everyone to death while they were reading it. And so that's part of why I came up with the elsewhere, because it's this alternate reality where things look very different, and it's almost got this very distorted, like soft horror, soft Alice in Wonderland fantasy theme to it. And I can write as much description as I want in there, and as long as it stays in those scenes, I think it helps build the world instead of boring the reader. And so that's why I wanted to have the elsewhere. Was I wanted something that was a little bit towards the higher fantasy end of the scale, but still keep the story grounded in the urban fantasy like landscape for the most part.
Okay. Well, that also makes a lot of sense. I mean, your reasons for choosing it, that because I think you can, or it must be kind of an inclination that people may have, is to, as you were saying, you want to get involved talking about certain things that may take away from the narrative. But if you do that, you can lose some people sometimes. So by
Yeah.
making it a different place, that makes perfect sense. Now, one thing that struck me in reading the book also is that you don't use first person narration, which a lot of urban fantasy does. And what I was wondering is if this is because, or if this is one of the reasons anyway, is that a few times within the first book, you do switch the perspective between Grimsby and Mayflower. And would that have been a bit more jarring to try to do that if you had chosen, first person narration for your main character? And but I was just curious about that, that aspect of the story.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. I knew I wanted to have multiple viewpoint characters, and I never really found a clean way of incorporating multiple viewpoints and remaining first person. I mean, I do like the first person perspective because it's just very involved and intimate. But I just wanted to be able to explore more of the world space and more of the different people that are in it, and because Mayflower and Grimsby have very different perspectives on the same subjects, and you can't really dive into those as much if you're staying in one person's viewpoint each time. And I knew I also wanted to have different viewpoint characters going down the road. So you get a little bit of peek of that in the epilogue. And then in the sequel that's coming out next year, I guess later this year, there's another new viewpoint character that was not in the first book. So, but I just wanted to kind of have more headspaces to explore. I thought that would be fun and interesting.
Of course, yes. Now, so far, in book one, who was your favorite secondary character to actually write? Who was kind of the most fun or the most rewarding for you?
The most fun to write was Wudge, because I just got to do whatever I wanted, and I could just justify it because he's Wudge. It was not hard to justify the most random and things that I could think of, and he didn't have to be particularly helpful. He didn't have to be particularly logical. He just had to be fun, and that was fun for me to write. But as far as the characters that are like the most interesting for me to write, I feel like, honestly, I like writing Mayflower a lot, because Mayflower is very understated compared to Grimsby, or at least I try to make it that way.
Mhm.
And I try to use a much less of a word count to communicate just as much emotion, because he's a more mature character. And so that was an interesting challenge for me to write to switch occasionally from Grimsby, who is a very kind of emotional, hot-headed young person, Mayflower, who's much more, reserved and older and matured, but still has his own bevy of trouble and emotion to kind of wade his way through.
Right. And to try to be expressing that in a man of few words, I'm sure was a challenge.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Another very interesting character, of course. Now, what do you feel are Grimsby's most positive personality characteristics, and which do you think are the ones that get him in the most trouble, or are the put up the most barriers for him? And they might even be the same characteristics.
There's a lot of overlap in those two.
Yes.
The Venn diagram's not quite a circle, but it's very
Yeah.
close. But I would say his most positive character trait, in terms of just like on the, like if you were to put it on like a good and evil scale, for instance, like his alignment trait, is he's very reluctant to pass final judgment. He's usually very willing to give people additional chances, and he's very stubborn. I think those kind of three things kind of come to align to make him, in a lot of ways, very anti-Mayflower, because he's kind of the opposite in all three of those things, which I think creates a kind of a fun balance between those two characters. But he's got a lot of naivety, naivete perhaps, that he is both kind of damning for him, but also very redemptive at the same time. And I kind of like to play that kind of fine line, or at least I try to make him a character that his innocence gets him into trouble, but also lets him keep his moral compass when getting out of it again.
Right. Yeah. And he's such a fun character, as a reader. I've found him to be such a fun character just because of those things that you mentioned, that he does have a certain amount of innocence, and yet at the same time, he hasn't let his circumstances, which, are not in the very beginning terrifically dire, but they might get that way.
They're draining is what they are.
Yeah, exactly. But they are still, something that those of us who aren't in his situation, we wouldn't want to be in his situation. And it doesn't make him jaded. He still ends up having, I think, a fair amount of hope about things, and kind of says, well, he still gets up every day and puts one foot in front of the other, even if he's not thrilled about his current situation.
Right.
And
which is, I think, something that we've all done at some point. The being stuck in a loop, but still kind of trudging your way through it, and hoping that things will kind of start to change slowly. I think everybody can relate to that.
Yes, and I think you see that, as the book goes on, you see how things begin to change for him. And he asks himself, kind of some of the hard questions, like, what is it I want to do? And, how do I respond in any given situation? And sometimes the easy way out is, from his perspective, not the right one. So it's like, okay, well, I don't do that. And, that's something that shows how he's also growing as he goes. And I think that's also important to any kind of a main character. I think you have to see that kind of, a little bit of growth here and there anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, which aspect of book one did you most enjoy writing? Was it the characters, the world building? It could even be something as specific as dialogue, the magic system. What part of it did you most enjoy?
I really enjoyed the back and forth with Grimsby and Mayflower. That was a lot of fun to write. Just being able to kind of have one get the edge over the other occasionally, and kind of banter and kind of develop them from uneasy allies to not partners, but getting very close to it, as they progress through, and having that bond, but also having that kind of playful banter friendship kind of start to slowly develop, reluctantly on the part of Mayflower, and kind of nervously on the part of Grimsby. But that was fun to do, and I really enjoyed Familiars. Familiars were really fun to set up and design, and they let me incorporate some kind of small horror elements in the story that were really fun, and I got to play around with that a little bit, and that was enjoyable.
Right. Yes, and I agree. I like the way you put that, small horror elements. Okay. Yeah. Like, how about mega creepy? We can go with that. That also works. That would fill the description there. Now, speaking of the magic system, what can you tell us a little bit about the premise behind the magic system of your world, without having to give away anything major, but just giving people a sense of what they can expect?
Well, I had to kind of approach it from a different fundamental design standpoint once I figured out that I didn't want magic to be a secret, because I still wanted it to feel like an urban fantasy story. And in that scenario, if magic's not a secret and it's easier than technology, then why wouldn't everybody just use magic? And then you start having more of like a Harry Potter kind of feel to it, instead of it feeling like a more gritty urban fantasy, down to earth kind of setting. And so magic had to be designed to have some limits on it, like accessibility has to be somewhat limited, so not everybody has access to it, which also helps with the kind of the cloistered Department of Unorthodox Affairs concept. And magic had to not have such a huge scale impact that it would supplant other parts of what we would consider recognizable in modern societies. Because then you wouldn't have an urban fantasy anymore. You'd have like a modern magic punk setting, which is not really what I was going for, although that does sound cool.
Yeah, now that you think about it.
Yeah, now I'm going on a tangent in my head. But in any case, so I had to make magic less powerful than technology in most ways, but have it still have some application in ways that technology just couldn't like step a toe into the same realm of. And that's part of why the Elsewhere exists. And that's part of the fundamental history of witches operating with the usual people. Usuals are the opposed to unorthodox. Their interaction is fundamentally based on they can see things that other people can't, and that's the main thing that they can offer. And then magic is sort of a set of useful tools to help them deal with the problems that those things that they could see that other people can't start creating for them. And so that's kind of the basis of when I started designing the magic system, what I wanted it to look like. And so essentially magic can't be better than a machine gun is kind of the general rule of thumb. It's more portable perhaps and a little more subtle. But fundamentally speaking, that's kind of, there's a certain threshold that magic can't go past and still be commonly accessible. And then there's magic that will be more powerful, that is kind of the darker magic and things like that. And that's another part of what the Unorthodox Affairs the department deals with. And that's kind of the magic that nobody's supposed to use, and that's allowed to be more powerful than the magic that everybody that can use magic can use. And so it's just kind of a fun little, like a building block system of kind of when I was setting it up, what I needed it to be at the time kind of shaped what it became.
Okay. Well, that's a great explanation. So thank you.
So I'm very technical sometimes when I think about this kind of stuff and describe it. So I hope that's still answering your question.
Oh, it does. Yes. Well, it makes a lot of sense because, you do wonder sometimes. I mean, especially when you're talking about being focused primarily on a particular genre, which I am in my case, with urban fantasy, I mean, it's not as though I don't read anything else, but that's what that's my thing. That's what I
Sure,
prefer.
certainly.
So, and so you do wonder at some point, well, how can people keep things fresh, and how can they keep it original, which folks seem to do. And kudos to all of you. But no, I think that's a great explanation. So thank you very much. And, just to explain not only how it works within the world, but kind of your thought process. It makes a lot of sense. So thank you. Now, you mentioned many, well, not many, but you mentioned some of the other creatures that some of the other unorthodox, such as vampires, Therians, and Selkies. Now, will we see any of those in the next book or any subsequent books?
Certainly. Part of why I chose to mention those particular ones is just because those are the ones that first came to mind when I was thinking about things to incorporate into sequels. And I want to approach them in different ways. Certainly different from what might be considered like stereotypical for those creatures in an urban fantasy setting. So I'm trying to find ways that are a little bit different to incorporate them, and that's actually proving to be very easy because they're common knowledge. At least the larger creatures, like the stuff that that you would see in the Twilight movies, those like vampires, werewolves that can be very cinematically portrayed are very commonly known, and so I can incorporate those in new ways pretty easily, just because I can play the public perception in the story against what the actual creatures are in the story, which has been a lot of fun.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I also want to find some lesser known creatures that are more kind of almost alien in a lot of ways to common knowledge, and I think that will be fun to incorporate too. And those ones I haven't mentioned, but will come into play kind of down the road. But I've been having a lot of fun setting up and designing those for future stories.
Well, good. I'm looking forward to it. Now, if Grimsby could make an appearance in any other urban fantasy series, just as maybe it could be a cameo, or it could be that he teams up with someone for some reason or other. What would you choose? And this could be either a book series or something on the television.
That's an interesting question I haven't thought about before. I mean, there's the obvious potential of like a Dresden cameo, but I don't think he'd do very well in the Dresden universe at all. He's a little too soft for that at the moment, at least.
He'd have to get toughened up a little bit first.
Yeah, he'd get himself killed on the way to being toughened up, if I had to guess.
Right, that's true. Yes.
I've always loved Supernatural. It's one of my favorite just series, especially up till season 5. And so I'd love to see him with Sam and Dean. I think that would be a really fun trio pair up.
That would, yes, and it may give Dean a different perspective on witches too.
Yeah,
One of the taglines for so long was always, I hate witches.
Yeah, especially in the supernatural setting, it's usually pretty well established that supernatural equals bad. And that's kind of the more or less the opposite of angle that I'm taking in my story. So that might be kind of a fun thing to play off of. But yeah, something along those lines I think would be a kind of a good time. There'd be good banter across the characters, I think, on either side of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now you're going to have me wondering about this. Yeah, that would be good. And now I'm going to have to, I'll be thinking back all these episodes that he could perhaps have,
really
ended up in.
Mayflower would do a lot better in the Supernatural universe than he does in the Grimsby universe, to be honest.
Or maybe it could be like a double appearance. They could both go. And,
maybe so.
That might, or they maybe, who knows? Maybe, there could be Sam and Dean showing up in one of your stories. Who knows? But that would have had to have been in the past. So, given what happens in the finale of the show,
right?
Now, Who have been, would you say, some of the most influential writers for you in terms of things that, that you feel as though their work is kind of, and I don't mean that it's a blueprint, but that you look at this and you say, that's something that I would enjoy doing someday, and you feel as though they've had some kind of an impact on you?
Well, especially over the last few years, I haven't really done nearly as much reading as I would like. Usually, when I'm in the headspace to read, I'm also in the same headspace to write, and so I
Yeah.
prefer to focus on the writing. But I did when I was kind of focusing on learning to write, I did listen to a lot of Brandon Sanderson's various podcasts and some of his like lectures on YouTube. I watched those on repeat for a long time, and some of the blueprints that, as you know, to use your word, the blueprints that he describes are part of like how I learned to write in a lot of
Oh,
ways. And kind of that how to structure a good story, or at least what I hope is a good story, and how to build a world that is engaging and interesting and something that's a little fresh and but still a little familiar, so that people have something new to explore and experience, but still have some touchstones to kind of cling to and feel like they have a fundamental understanding about the world at the same time. And so I would probably say that those kind of various things that he's produced to help new writers have been some of the most fundamental for me to learn to write in the first place.
that's great. I've heard people talk about those, but not to the, not having listened to them myself. It's nice to know that they've had that kind of an impact on
Yeah.
you.
Well, and they're very well structured for people, for from the angle of people that want to learn to write. So it's like the old adage of a writer being a writer is like being a magician. Like when you're, it's kind of the difference of trying to learn the magician's trick from the audience versus from backstage. And since I was focused on, I wanted to become a magician, I wanted to spend more time backstage than in the audience. And so
Right,
that's why I haven't spent as much time reading as I have on more researching, to be honest.
right. And I know that, I mean, that has to, if it's something that you love to do and you have to take away some time from that in order to get to do the other thing you love, that's just
Right.
that's the way it works out sometimes. Now, when did you decide that, okay, this is what I want to do, that I want to be a writer? This is
Well,
the,
I had English teachers tell me I was good at writing when I was in high school, so I just assumed I'd be a bestseller before I was 20. That was kind of a given.
yeah,
Uh, and then that didn't happen. That was weird. That threw me off. And then I wrote my first book. I actually wrote the end of my first book when I was 21 or 22, somewhere right in there. And I have it printed out, and nobody will ever read it. It's going to stay in a box in the closet and remain there until the end of time. Um,
yeah.
but it wasn't until I finished writing that book that I realized just how far away from my goal I was. And so that's when I actually started taking writing a little bit more seriously and focusing my efforts on not just writing a book that I assumed would be a bestseller or something, but writing better books. And so Grimsby, I think, is book 7 thereabouts, and the actual kind of books that I've more or less finished, or at least gotten pretty close to finishing. And so it took me about 7 books and about 8 or 9 years before I actually was able to start reaching the goal that I had assumed would just kind of come without any kind of effort in my teenage years. But so somewhere in like just after my early 20s, I would say, is where I decided like this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm going to focus on.
Okay. I like that, though, that your initial comment about you assumed you were going to be this, and then
It
when it
just
didn't
seems. I mean,
happen.
if my dad could do it, it just seems so easy.
Right, because I'm sure he would tell you that, oh yeah, this is really easy, right? Yeah, that would be the first thing. Now, and this is kind of another sort of craft question, but I'm always interested to find out people's answers about this as well. But when you are in the process of actually writing, do you prefer Yeah, actual quiet. I mean, absolute quiet. Do you need just, nothing else or no one else around? And or do you like some kind of background sound or, something? Which is your preference?
I like some kind of background sound, but without any words involved.
Mm.
Like if it's like something playing on the television and there's people talking, it just kind of is very distracting for that area of my brain for whatever reason. So I usually will put on some music that is instrumental and somewhat appropriate for the setting.
Ah,
Like if you were to go to a restaurant in that setting, that's the music that would be playing in the background. That's kind of the vibe of the music that I aim for. Sometimes when I want something that's a little more subtle, I'll just turn on, the there's a lot of videos on YouTube that are just 8 hours of rain or 8 hours of crackling fire to help you sleep and stuff like that. And I'll turn that on, and that'll just be my background noise. I definitely am kind of the kind of person that needs something going on in the background. Like just complete quiet is very distracting. It's very loud. And
right.
so it usually ranges between one of those two things is what I aim for.
Okay. And that seems to be the most common response, actually. So,
Yeah, I'm
and
sure.
I can definitely understand that when you say that about silence being very loud. If you're sometimes I think if you're trying to concentrate, you're thinking, well, what's going on that I'm not hearing? It's like
Yeah.
when you have kids and they're upstairs and all of a sudden you hear nothing and you think there must be something going on. So yeah, I'm sure it's distracting in that kind of way. Now you did say something that I'm very interested in, and I'm sure that anyone watching this will be as well. You said that book two will be out later this year. Do you have any idea about when that would be, or we just have
Uh,
to stay tuned?
I mean, I don't want to give any specifics because I don't know what I'm allowed to say, to be
Right,
honest.
right. Understood.
So
Yeah.
I think the plan is to release it roughly the same time as the last book was
Okay.
of the year. So hopefully before the end of the year.
Sounds good.
Sometime in the fall seems very likely. But I've shipped off the manuscript for that, and it's been revised and being copy edited, I think, right now. So it's essentially done. And then there's just the kind of the business end of the publishing side of things now that the creative work's more or less handled. So it is on track, and it won't be delayed on, at least not on my end. I mean, who knows what might come up and delay it from there side of things, but I'm confident that it'll be roughly the same time.
Well, that sounds wonderful. We are looking forward to it very much, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come and answer all these questions
Of course,
for me today. I really do appreciate it, and I know that I would also like to recommend that all of our viewers, if you're an urban fantasy fan, you need to read this book. So please do so.
I'd
It
also recommend that, but
Yeah.
I'm a little biased.
Yeah, just a tad, but it really is good. I really enjoyed it personally, and I know that that people who follow the track, whether in person or virtually, will also do so. And before we go, I do just want to let people know that we will have our season 4 Buffy Watch discussion next week, Thursday at 8 o'clock p.m., and that will be live. That information will also be on the Facebook page, but I just wanted to put in a plug for Buffy Watch. So, in any case, James, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who is going to see this, and we hope you enjoy the book. Thank you so much.
Thanks.